Hello, everybody. Great. We are just going to wait a minute or two to see if anybody else pops on. Thank you all for your patience. We were having some technical difficulties. And yeah, if you could start putting your names in the chat, your organization, if applicable. I know there's some folks here who may just be joining us as individuals. That's great. Where you may be based or where you consider home or where your organization is, and what pronouns you use. And actually, I'm going to change my name here. I am Natalia Rudiak. I am with ReImagine Appalachia. I specifically work with our faith team, our faith and action team, many of whom are here. So we have an internal team. And we are doing some really exciting stuff. I'll let Amani, our Faith and Action Coordinator, speak to that. Primarily, just for your knowledge, we as ReImagine Appalachia are a 4-state coalition. We work in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. And we work to move our region to a more sustainable economy. And we were big advocates around the infrastructure bills, trying to get Appalachian priorities in those bills. And now we're working on how do we win the win? How do we make sure now that all of this amazing funding that's coming through, that our communities know about it? And that includes all of you. So if you're just entering now, please enter your name, organization, location, and pronouns. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Amani, who's going to talk a little bit about our faith and action work.
Thanks, Natalia, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amani Reed. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the new Faith and Action Coordinator for ReImagine Appalachia, and I am so excited and thankful to be here. And I'm here to talk to you guys about our Faith and Action Toolkit. Firstly, we all know that clean air, good jobs, and sustainable development are good for everyone, regardless of race, class, or social status, or where you live. And ReImagine Appalachia throughout the years has long embraced faith communities who can bring trust, compassion, and grace to the table. People of faith also bring together neighbors, and we rise above political divisiveness to refine our common ground and our common humanity. We've launched a Faith and Action Toolkit showcasing Reimagine Your Community, and it's a model of community organizing and economic development. This toolkit also provides hands-on guidance on how faith communities can vision and in time implement sustainable development projects in their neighborhood, their town, even their county, and even broadly their region. So we're really excited to launch this, and you can find more information on the website. I believe Natalia is going to drop a link if she hasn't already. And also really exciting, in the new year, we are going to have a 2023 strategy summit. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call were at the one last year. This one for 2023, or sorry, the one in 2022 this year. So for 2023, the dates are going to be Tuesday, January 10th, from 11 a.m. to 2:15, and also Wednesday, January 11th, from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And we're excited for the opportunities for the Appalachia region, from things like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Infrastructure Package, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and we want to make sure we can maximize the benefits to the communities in this region. And we will have the Biden administration, officials from his administration, and experts from labor, economic development, environmental justice, racial and community justice present with us, and they'll talk about what it will take to compete successfully for these federal resources, so that this money and resources can go to Appalachia. Also to strategize to work on what we need to do together to draw down on those resources and start turning our collective vision for the future ahead so that we can have a sustainable future and reality. And Natalia has dropped the link, and you can register now for that. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Amani. Perfect overview. I will also say our Faith in Action team is coming up with a number of events. Let's see, we're still figuring out the dates, but late February through April. All the things that you're going to hear about here, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's solar, whether it's weatherization, whether it's making sure that workers get good paying jobs, we're going to cover in depth in some individual webinars. So you can do a deep dive on that. This is really an overview. As you hear everybody talking today, I think it's helpful for you all to think about whether it's your house of worship itself, whether it's your city block, whether it's your village, whether it's your county, to think about how you can start planning some of these things and putting all of this in action. So yeah, choose your own adventure, and we're about to get started. Yes, and if you just joined, please put your name, organization, and geographic region in the chat. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing before we get into the meat of all of this. And something I want to say is you're going to hear a lot about different opportunities for nonprofit organizations, of course, of which, you know, our faith communities often fall into this category. And I think it's really important to just start dreaming. Think about your entry point in this process. Maybe it's not just you. Maybe it's a cohort of churches. Maybe it's a parish. Maybe it's a council that you may be involved with. Maybe it's a network across different cities. Take this info back. Think about it. Think about maybe applying for funds at the same time. Some of these funds may have thresholds. Think about taking it back to your communities, your, you know, city officials, educators, parents at your church. So we're trying to really make this exciting for our own faith communities, but also for the communities that we live in. All right, I'm going to stop talking. I am going to hand it over, and we have our friends from the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. And I also want to thank our partners here, the Evangelical Environmental Network, who Faith in Action closely partners with to bring you events such as these. So thanks EEN and Kim from EEN for hooking us up. So, all right, Daniel, Miguel, the floor is yours.
Great, well, thanks everybody. It's really nice to see everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Hopefully you can see my slides. I see some spirit fingers in the air, so I'm going to take that as a good thing. I'm Dan Brissett. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Energy Study Institute. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Miguel and Molly. I will be sure our contact information is available at the end of the slides. I hope everyone feels free, even after today, to follow up, especially with Miguel and with Molly. If you follow up with me, I'll end up probably just following up with Miguel and Molly anyway, since they're the people who brought us together today. But I'm going to make a quick presentation about some of the specific opportunities in the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act that nonprofits may soon be able to take advantage of. And I think I'll do my best to keep this within about 15 minutes or so. This is just a quick slide about EESI. We're a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit. There are 15 of us total. We work on congressional education. We also do a lot of work on policy, expanding opportunities for financing and financing clean energy, specifically in rural areas. This is all available on our website, www.eesi.org. I just wanted to say a few words to introduce ourselves. So the theme today of these slides is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is always a good thing, especially for a nonprofit organization. Energy efficiency is the idea that, you know, there are things you can do in your structures that consume less energy, and most energy or an awful lot of energy in our buildings is wasted anyway. And so energy efficiency is a great way to cut that waste. As fellow nonprofit stakeholders, we all know that there are only so many things we can do to cut expenses, and energy efficiency is one of those things that we can do, save money that we can then repurpose to advance our missions, our core missions, and serve the communities that rely on us for all sorts of different things. Energy efficiency also is a lead by example opportunity. It improves the sustainability and comfort and sort of friendliness of our facilities and operations, and that's good for people who work in those spaces. It's also good for people who need those spaces for products and services. And then, of course, it would be remiss to say that one of the main reasons why we make investments in energy efficiency is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's the name of our game. We're a climate policy nonprofit, and one of the best, fastest, cheapest things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint is to simply use less energy. Buried away in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is about 13 months old, there is a very small program provided to the Department of Energy. This is a dense slide. I have a few others that we'll go through in a moment, but I wanted to specifically call this one out because there's actually a comment period open for it right now that the Department of Energy has taken comments on. And as we were just talking about, this is a really important opportunity for nonprofit sector stakeholders to tell the agencies and to communicate with the agencies what they would like to see to make these programs workable. This is a small program. It's $50 million. It's a pilot program. So hopefully if it's successful, that can open up additional resources later on. We know a few things at this point. Again, we're about 13 months into the infrastructure bill. And so the list of things we know is shorter than the list of things we don't know. But we know what a nonprofit building is, and that's a building operated and owned by an organization that falls under the 501c3 section of the Internal Revenue Code. We know what energy efficiency material means, and that's a product, piece of equipment, or system that results in a reduction of energy. That includes roofs, all of these sorts of things. Also heating, cooling, and air conditioning. So those are one of the single largest consumers of energy in all of our buildings is space heating, space conditioning, and also water heating. And we know roughly what the criteria for these grants will be. We know that they'll be using a performance-based criteria that will give priority to applications based first and foremost on energy savings achieved, but then there are other circumstances that the Department of Energy will look at in an application, including the financial need of the applicant. Those are all things that are prescribed by the statute that Congress enacted. And so now basically it is up to the Department of Energy to sort through answers of all the things that we do not know. And this is really important because even though the program has been authorized, it hasn't been launched yet. We don't know exactly when applications will be open. We don't know exactly when funding will start rolling, but we know the Department of Energy is working very hard on it. And in fact, they have a request for information out that's due December 22nd. And that RFI is available at energy.gov. And Miguel and Molly have a bunch of links that they'll start adding to the chat as well about EESI, but more specifically about these resources. So the list of things we don't know that would be really good to know in order for applications or for nonprofits to submit applications. First, we don't know what the minimum grant amount is. We know what the maximum is, $200,000, but for a lot of community-based nonprofits, that's probably more than you could really scope an energy efficiency project to be. We don't know exactly how the criteria for the grants will be weighted. We know that they're listed in a particular order, but we don't know exactly how DOE will take that. We don't know exactly if they will, sort of add an element that allows for, one criteria to count a lot more or a lot less than the others. We don't know how involved the application process will be. If any of you have had the pleasure of receiving DOE funds in the past, it can be a fairly burdensome process, and that has the potential to keep these funds out of the hands of nonprofits, especially in under-resourced communities that might have a hard time sort of keeping up with the Department of Energy's demands. So it's really important, and one of the things that we're telling them or advising them on is to hopefully make this application process streamlined and accessible. We don't know how many applications they'll receive, but we're only talking about $50 million, and there are lots and lots and lots of nonprofits in the United States. And so there's a good chance that the program will be significantly oversubscribed. We don't know when the grants will be awarded, but we know it's not going to be in 2022. It would be real nice if it was in 2023. And I think that's roughly the schedule they're looking at, but 2023 is 12 months long. And so when exactly that opportunity comes up, we don't know exactly. And then when the grants are dispersed, just because you win an award, when do the dollars actually start moving to the recipients? So if you or your colleagues at your organizations have thoughts about what the answers to these questions ought to be, I really encourage everyone to take a few moments, that's probably a facetious thing to say. Take a few hours and submit some comments to DOE, because it's really, really important that they hear from different stakeholders. If they only hear from one nonprofit sector, it would be a real shame if they designed the program that was inaccessible for particular reasons for other nonprofit sectors. So why are we talking about this program now when the application process isn't open, when we don't know when the awards will be made, when we don't know when the dollars will roll? Well, the reason is because energy efficiency is always a good thing. And there are things that that we all can be doing now to prepare ourselves for when the opportunity does arise. And as Jessica said, there are other incentives coming down the pike as well beyond this program. And so all of the things listed on this slide are things that take time, they take expertise, they take experience. But the last time you want to start working on benchmarking or itemizing or doing an energy efficiency inventory in your building is when you only have 30 days to submit an application to DOE. You don't want to take yourself out of the running. And so these are some suggestions for what nonprofits can be doing now towards the end of 2022 and early 2023, so that when that opportunity presents itself, you can be ready. And the first is really just understanding the energy efficiency of your building. What are the makes and models of your furnace or heat pump or water heaters? How many light bulbs or lighting fixtures do you have? If you are a nonprofit that has cooking equipment, how old is it? What fuel does it run on? These sound obvious, but it's when you start digging around in the basements and the crawl spaces and the attics and looking at the electrical panels, there's a lot of information you can glean, and that will help you identify savings later. Another thing is for benchmarking. We don't know exactly what DOE will ask of its applicants in terms of reporting, but there'll probably be something. And reporting energy efficiency after the project is complete really starts before the project is even initiated. And then that is about benchmarking, understanding sort of what the energy consumption profile of your building was before the project and after the project, and then using that comparison to calculate savings. There is a really excellent a free tool available from Energy Star called Portfolio Manager. But again, it's not something you want to, it's not something you can really cram for. You have to kind of take some time and maybe even reach out to stakeholders in your individual networks to find people who've used it. Nice thing about Portfolio Manager is that it's in use everywhere. And so my guess is that almost any community you come across, you could find someone who's had some experience with Energy Star. And then also goal setting is really important. When you have the opportunity to do an application, what are you looking to get out of it? What are the energy efficiency goals? What are the internal and external stakeholders you need to start approaching? Do you have a board of directors that needs to be bought in? Do you have a facility manager who might be able to help? These are the kinds of questions that we can start thinking through, even though there's a lot of uncertainty about what the offering could ultimately look like. Also, this program we expect to be fully oversubscribed, which means there will be applicants with really good projects that don't get funded. The nice thing about energy efficiency is it tends to pay for itself, and so there may be other funding opportunities, whether they're provided by the IIJA or the Inflation Reduction Act or your local utility or your state energy office. But having a project scoped out in advance might help you identify additional sources of funding to leverage. Also, getting in touch with auditors and potentially contractors, bringing in professionals who can help scope out projects to maximize the cost effectiveness. And a lot of that can be done too in partnership with your local utility. And then reading about the experiences of other nonprofits. I've worked with several nonprofits that have improved their energy efficiency, and they all have lessons learned. And there are things that potentially, nonprofits that are newer to the game or newer to DOE grants, or newer to direct pay alternatives for tax incentives might have something that they can share. Jessica mentioned these tax incentive as well, and we wanted to include a slide here because this is an enormous opportunity. The nonprofits pilot program is a limited opportunity in comparison to this, but this is a real game changer. The ability to access tax credits that were previously limited to entities, taxable entities, that had a tax liability. These are potentially game-changing, not just for energy efficiency, but beyond energy efficiency. It's always good to start with energy efficiency, but battery storage and solar in particular, enormous opportunities. And we will see I think there's just a lot of pent-up demand among nonprofits. And then there are opportunities for bonus points for organizations that exist in energy communities. And that brings me to my last slide, which is just a compendium of some resources that we put together. That last one on the page, Clean Energy Tax Credits Get a Boost. That's an article that Miguel wrote. It goes into a lot of what Jessica was talking about it in a little bit greater detail. And we also started developing a lot of nonprofit or online resources for nonprofits that go into a lot of these points in greater detail. And if everything is always free, available for free online at www.eesi.org. And keep an eye on the Department of Energy. In particular, they have lots of great resources to help nonprofits get up to speed. And once again, a quick plug for Energy Star, a tremendous resource as well. That is it. I look forward to hearing from the rest of the presenters and for the opportunity to take questions. And this is our contact information. I hope everyone feels free to ping me and Molly and Miguel if there are anything we can be helpful with in the future. And Natalia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Right, thank you. I love the fact that even though there were a lot of question marks, there are also a lot of concrete things to do. It's almost like studying, for a final exam. You can't just cram in everything in the last 30 days. You kind of have to be studying the whole semester. And that's what we're doing. It's a learning process. So thanks, that was amazing. I am going to pass it over to Kim, who is going to facilitate the next part of our discussion.
So people have been putting questions in the chat, and you can feel free to continue to add questions and we can get those answered as well. But the first question that was in the chat was, where do we find out how to apply for the tax credits, either on behalf of communities or individual residents or commercial businesses?
Is that Natalia, what's the rule for offering responses? Is Jessica still with us?
I do think she dropped off.
Okay. Well, I think the right answer for anything tax related is to consult with your tax professional. But the IRS is working very hard to get guidance out. And so I think we will know a lot more in the next month or two about how the application process for this works. My guess is that there's a form to fill out. We're talking about the Internal Revenue Service. But in terms of what that form requires, I think those are all unknowns at this point. The Treasury Department just closed down a series of requests for information. And my guess is that they're combing through those things. And I think they've heard from many people that, improving the accessibility of these direct pays is also, potentially a good thing.
Thank you. And Jeff, I know that you have been thinking a lot about these questions as well in terms of how in the heck are we gonna approach all of this? So I'm gonna pass it over to you. I should have passed it over to you earlier, but I got so excited about all these amazing questions in the chat. But yeah, why don't Jeff is joining us, Jeffrey Allen is joining us from the West Virginia Council of Churches. So I'll let you say a few words as well.
Oh, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see everyone. My name is Jeff Allen. I'm a United Methodist pastor and the executive director of the West Virginia Council of Churches. So this is a lot of information. It is hard to keep track of it all. I mean, it really sort of speaks to the fact that we need, sort of a central person or a central way to keep track of all this, either an intermediary or something like an online resource that you can refer to and to keep track of this. ReImagining Appalachia, I think, can sort of play that role. If you do have questions, I mean, there are people here that, if they don't know, they can connect you with someone. So how do we share this information with our congregations and our communities and among family, friends, or even strangers? What role can the faith community play? I think the faith community can do 5 things. All fortunately begin with the letter C. Communicate, connect, collaborate, have conversations, and commit. First, the faith community can communicate. We can pass this information about the Inflation Reduction Act. We can get the word out. We can do this through our bulletin inserts. We can post it on our congregations' websites and Facebook pages. We can share a story in our newsletters and e-news. We can hold community meetings and we can invite people in. Second, the faith community can connect. We can be a hub for information and for action. We can create a network of experts and contacts who can help answer questions that people might have. We might know the answer, but if we know the right person to connect someone with, that's just invaluable. We can connect, collaborate, and have conversations with people in our own faith community and across faith communities. We don't have to do this on our own. We can work together. For example, a congregation could create a support group of churches or other faith communities who are having or thinking about having solar panels installed on their roofs. This group could meet and talk about questions they have, what's working, what's not working. You could even invite people who are not attending congregations to this group. Another idea might be starting an electrical vehicle club. There are tax credits for electric vehicles, or maybe a solar panel club in your community. We can be advocates for those being left out of the conversation in our communities. We can add our voices to theirs. We can make sure that everyone is receiving the same information and that everyone is receiving the same benefit. The faith community can commit to building a just transition. A just transition is not just moving from one type of economy to another in the here and now. A just transition is also a transition between this generation and the next. A just transition has everything to do with the world we leave behind for our children. Parents want their children to have better lives than they did. It is then a moral imperative that we leave our planet in better condition than it is currently headed. By 2015 or by 2050, my generation will mostly be gone, but our children and some of the people here on this call will still be here. Father Ken Utener wrote a poem called Prophets of a Future Not Our Own, and part of the poem reads thus: "This is what we are about. We plant seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something, and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own." My hope and my prayer is that the faith community will be remembered as being a leading force for change for a just and environmentally secure tomorrow. Thank you. That's it.
You should have warned us to get Kleenex beforehand. I don't know whether to put my fists in the air or just start emoting. Thank you, Jeff. That was really beautiful. The call to action in many different ways. So I'll pass it back over to you, Kim, and we can start getting back into some good questions that our folks have.
And yes, that was beautiful, Jeff. And just real quick, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Kim Anderson. I'm Associate Director for Outreach in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So I do state work in both of those states. And I work for Evangelical Environmental Network. And just to give you an idea of what you can do with this money, one thing that we talk to about churches is, imagine that if you reduce your energy and you're recovering some costs, then you can turn that money around and apply it to missions, or for a nonprofit, maybe you could expand and things like that. So, just keep in mind how far this money can go. The saved money can go if you are able to save money through some of these programs. So another question for Daniel, just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you know about the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed and the benefits that there might be in that for churches and nonprofits.
Sure. So the big one, well, there's a lot, $369 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's the single largest climate investment ever. There's a lot. And that only happened in August. So we're still, we have 13 months under our belt with the infrastructure bill, but only a couple months with the Inflation Reduction Act. The agencies are moving very quickly. I would say the main benefit probably to nonprofits, well, there's many, but I think the big one for this audience is probably that direct pay access to tax incentives. So I had a slide about this, and basically nonprofit organizations are tax exempt. That's part of the fun of being a public charity. That means though that you don't have a tax liability. And a lot of US clean energy incentives over the years have used the tax code sort of as their primary vehicle. So there have been far more tax incentives and tax deductions given to incentivize energy efficiency, renewable energy deployment, things like that, than there have been sort of direct grants. It's a very useful way to mobilize private capital. Companies are typically quite good, especially on the company side, they're typically quite good at understanding and taking advantage of the tax code. And so for lots of reasons, the tax code has been kind of the primary thrust of a lot of this. And that's very true in the Inflation Reduction Act. Most of the emissions reductions that will result from the Inflation Reduction Act will come through the tax code. And if you're familiar with the Paris Agreement, which the US has pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 50% by 2030, the investments in the Inflation Reduction Act will result in about a 40% reduction. So it will definitely get us on track, but it won't get us all the way there. The reason why the direct pay opportunity is potentially so impactful is previously nonprofits or organizations without tax liability had to find someone in the private sector who was willing to partner with them on a project that they could then take the tax incentive. That was problematic for a number of reasons, and Miguel just put a great article in the chat. All of our, I think, articles talk about this. I think that, and they're all good resources, kind of to Jeff's point about sort of sharing information via your networks. I think our articles could be helpful with that. Not all taxable entities have a tax liability. Not all of them are out there looking for opportunities to partner with nonprofits, and so it was a real barrier for especially solar energy, and I would say battery storage and things like that. But really, solar energy was the big one. The 30% tax incentive that was available to the private sector, to taxable entities, was simply not on the table for most nonprofits. What the IRA did is it changed that, and so in lieu of a tax incentive, you can actually, in lieu of a tax credit, you can receive a check from the federal government for the value of the tax incentive. And that cuts out the so-called middleman, that cuts out the need to have a private sector partner. And it completely changes the economics of solar installations in particular for nonprofits. And to the point that Kim just made, if you're thinking about a solar installation, that's great. But the last thing you want to do is put a solar installation on an inefficient building because it costs more. And so I think it also opens the opportunity for nonprofits to start thinking about energy efficiency, even if energy efficiency isn't the final goal, even if renewable energy, even if being net zero, even if serving as a community solar hub or something like that for your community is your end goal, it now makes that energy efficiency economic opportunity even more powerful. And starting, I think, probably in the next couple months, we'll find out for sure from the IRS, it's just a total game changer. In terms of how nonprofits will be able to access clean energy and renewable energy in particular.
Thank you, Daniel. I think I'm very excited about the Inflation Reduction Act, so it's good to hear a little bit more. And I know we have a lot more information coming out in the next few months. And for all of you, keep posted for many of the ReImagine Appalachia events that we have coming up that will talk about some of these things. The second question that was put in the chat was, do we need to wait for our states to offer RFPs related to the Inflation Reduction Act? Daniel, go ahead.
I would say the answer probably is it depends. The states will not be a state energy office or a community action agency or something like that. They will not be involved in the tax incentives. That'll be something between the entity and the IRS. And there will be guidance, I expect, on how that will actually work coming out, in the next couple months. A lot of the Inflation Reduction Act incentives and programs, and a lot of the infrastructure programs do, in fact, have to flow through the states. They're specifically designed to flow through the states. The state energy offices in particular have a long track record in very effectively deploying these dollars. If you're familiar with the Weatherization program, the state energy program, low-income heating assistance, local LIHEAP, low-income heating and energy assistance program. There's a lot of expertise, and I think Congress was probably wise to choose to put so many of these resources sort of through the state. The trick, though, is that takes time. It takes time to develop the programs. It takes time to for the states to design the programs. It takes time for the money to run. And so we kind of find ourselves at this spot where for a lot of the programs that we've talked about, especially on the residential side, but I would say also on the school buses and schools and grid improvement opportunities, we're kind of waiting for the Department of Energy to figure out the structure of the program, and then states will then figure out the structure of their programs. So there's a lot of, I think, built up energy. One reason why I think at ESI we've tended to be a little vague is because it's ultimately not up to us. We don't want to set anyone's expectations too high. But having, including the state energy office or other state agencies that are connected or have connections with DOE, including those folks in your networks at this point, is probably a really good idea, because they're going to have the best information, and they're going to also have the best sense of sort of where the different states' priorities could be. The nonprofits program, which was the focus of most of my slides, does not go through the states. We don't think it will. We think it will go directly from the Department of Energy to nonprofits, which is one reason why we're a little bit more comfortable talking about that program in terms of what we know and we don't know, because there won't be that intermediary that is sorting through the applications. It will be done, basically between the Department of Energy, its contractors probably, and then the applicants from across the nonprofit sector.
Okay, great. Lots of information and lots of things to look forward to. The next question in the chat was, what steps would you like to see West Virginia state officials take to make the benefits of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and especially the Inflation Reduction Act, easier to access for faith-based nonprofits and houses of worship?
Well, I think the first, I think they're, well, kind of to Jeff's point, all of those C's, I think, have a very significant role in including people, in state government and local government. Local government will have a lot of say in this too. Most climate action in the United States up until now has come from states and local governments. So they are very much they're very much aware of what's going on. But I think taking the opportunity to submit comments is really important. In the faith community, for example, what about if the Department of Energy comes out with a program application that requires a cost share? Is that something that's doable for a particular faith-based organization? What about if, in order to access financing, you have to put collateral up? Is that something that that an organization, that a church or other religious organization is comfortable with? Those are the kinds of things that DOE really needs to hear from the people who are affected. Like, this will work for us. This will not work for us. Those kinds of programmatic decisions are going to be made on the front end. And if they don't get them right, or if they base them on incomplete information because organizations didn't have the opportunity to submit comments, that's something that would be really too bad. And it would take time for that to change. It doesn't mean it's going to be, I was going to say carved in stone. I guess that's, inappropriate metaphor, but, it will take time to change, and we wouldn't want to lose the opportunity for doing that. So I think those are very important. Sharing comments with organizations, with the states, is probably also a good idea. I think banding together to the extent that, these do take hours to put together. The questions that DOE is asking is very specific. And the questions that, for example, EPA is asking about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the questions that the IRS was just asking, or the Treasury Department, which they're specific. And so it is, I think, a really good opportunity to weigh in. If you've missed an opportunity, I think I would be in touch with folks engaged on the implementation side to understand, the state energy office, for example, local governments, things like that. And then also organizations like ESI and EN, organizations that have, insight into how the programs are being implemented in Washington, that will ultimately flow down through states and local governments. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I think most of those opportunities probably require phone calls, meetings, or typing. But this is the opportunity to inform how that goes.
A follow-up question that I had about submitting comments is if you can give people an idea of, how you submit comments, what the criteria are for comments, and, where they actually go to submit those comments.
It varies. So most of the requests for information that are available right now, and I'll ask Miguel and Molly to maybe paste the nonprofits one because I think it's a good example into the chat. These are not, the DOE is not setting regulations. And so it's not like what you might be familiar with where there's a 90-day comment period, those comments get posted online. The requests for information actually include all of that information. They include what to put on the front page, what email address to send it in, what document format. Miguel and I had comments due today at noon, believe it or not. And it needed to be submitted in a Word file with a docx extension. So we had to make sure we got the extension right. We couldn't submit a PDF. All of that information is in there. And a lot of that is because it makes it easier for the agencies to collect the comments and then do what it needs to do with them. But they're sort of comment by comment. Most of the RFIs that I've seen lately do not, or they actually include language that basically says this is not a funding opportunity announcement. Submitting comments means nothing in terms of future applications that you may or may not decide to submit. Submitting a comment does not guarantee a response. Submitting a comment does not mean we have to post them online. And so there are those kinds of caveats written into the RFIs as well. And so I think going into them, understanding like this is, you don't have to comment on everything. I think one thing that we do is we kind of look through the RFIs and we say, okay, well, what do we know about? What do we have strong feelings about? And what might DOE not hear from other groups? And that's kind of how we focus the thrust of our comments. We try to focus on things we have something to say about, that we know something about, and we wouldn't want anything to go unmentioned. We never take it for granted that someone else is going to say something, sort of on every organization to kind of speak up for itself.
Great, that was helpful. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Can I interrupt? I just want to be extra clear. So when people click on this energy.gov link, and as that pops up, the main thing that I'm seeing here that would really apply to us. I mean, I don't know anything about fisheries, but hey, maybe someone here does. Maybe that's your thing. But I really see energy efficiency materials pilot for nonprofits. And so it would probably make the most sense for folks to click on that. And we would need to click on the documents link. And just by downloading that and looking at that, it talks about what the comments really need to look like and where you can email them. Is that kind of where?
It's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's exactly right. And also like the comments can change. There could be a deadline. I don't think there'll be a deadline extension for this one. It's kind of already butting up against Christmas. I think that's the plan. But the ones that we had due today were actually originally due last week and they gave an extension. So those are things that the department has to publish. And the link that Miguel put in, that energy, the RFI document itself they should always be posting the most updated versions to prevent people from using out-of-date information.
Now, just also like when I see here, it looks really intimidating. There's like 5 categories and each category has like 10 questions, but I think it's important that like you don't need to answer every single question, correct? If you have a few paragraphs and you're a small organization somewhere, I think in some ways that could even be more valuable than some of the more institutional folks who aren't necessarily on the ground like you all are. So I know these things can be intimidating, so I just wanted to be extra clear about how that goes.
I mean, the questions in the PDF document, the questions start on page 7 out of 11. So most of the first couple pages are here's what we're up to, and they go through kind of a lot of the basics, which is useful to know. And then when you get to the questions, it's often, in fact, a lot of times they'll specifically ask for this. They'll say, what category and what question are you responding to? And then after that, you can, I mean, basically there's no required format for the answer. If you have a couple sentences you wish to share, if it's a paragraph, if it's a series of links, all of that stuff is fair game. But the people who will be reading this ultimately will be having to figure out what to do with the information. and how that information may or may not be complementary to the other responses that it receives, that DOE receives. But yeah, you could focus. I mean, I think on this one, for example, one of the things that we've been sort of spending a lot of time thinking about is outreach. There are a lot of nonprofits, for example, in communities that may not have close relationships, or they may not be, they may be geographically remote. How should the Department of Energy ensure that nonprofits in areas like the areas represented here on the call get the information and not just eventually hear about it? I'm talking about like, how should that outreach actually be structured? How is that outreach? How could that outreach be effective? How could that outreach be respectful? How could that outreach be productive? Those are exactly the kinds of things that a nonprofit, in a remote corner of the country that maybe doesn't do a lot with the Department of Energy might say, actually, this is how it should happen. And because this is how I could participate if it happens. I think accessibility with these programs for nonprofits is going to be the number one challenge. Organizations that have, like the direct pay is a great example. I'm curious how many organizations on this call have a tax compliance department. My guess is that it's a relatively low number. So how on earth are nonprofits expected to take advantage of the direct pay option? Okay, fine, you can read the IRS guidance, but what about if it's not written in plain English? What about if it's confusing? What about if you don't have a tax degree or have someone on your board who has that kind of experience? Accessibility is going to be a major challenge. And I think that is something that DOE is very aware of, and they're extremely aware of it for this community and for this sector in particular. And also, I think they also realize that if they're going to make their Justice 40 goals and meet their other environmental justice goals, nonprofit sector is going to be one of those key sort of really critical sectors full of stakeholders and partners that without them, they're just simply not going to they're not going to stand a chance to meet those goals. And so I think there's a lot of strong motivations in the agencies to really take what this community says seriously, but they have to be told, and they have to be told it in the setting that they're requesting it. And that's where these comments come in.
Daniel, you referenced Justice 40. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for those who might not know?
Sure. Justice 40 is an initiative, it's a priority of the Biden-Harris administration that essentially requires 40% of the benefits of the investments that we've been talking about to be realized within sort of quote unquote disadvantaged communities. The definition of what that means is sort of being formulated, but essentially it's I think it's in generally a recognition that in order to facilitate a just transition to a decarbonized clean energy economy, all sectors of the economy, all communities have to be part of that and given an opportunity to not just participate, but also thrive. And Justice 40 is a way to do that. We did a briefing on it back in April with some really great speakers. And that would be Miguel or Molly might be able to find that link and pop it in the chat. I think we have written summary notes, so you don't actually have to watch the briefing. You could just read the notes to get a little bit of an idea about, at least in April, what was happening with Justice 40.
Okay, thank you. The next question in the chat was from Julie Nutter, and it's specific. We've outgrown our current leased building and plan to build a new facility. Would we be eligible for this grant?
Well, this is a great example of the kind of question that it's way too early to know for sure. We do know, however, that the statute requires the facilities to be owned and operated by the nonprofit. So that is written into the law. I'm not sure there's going to be any way around that. Whether you're anticipating moving into a space that isn't energy efficient, could you potentially use a pilot program grant to improve its energy efficiency? Potentially. I think generally when these kinds of programs are being thought about, they're being thought about as retrofits. So improvements to existing buildings as opposed to incorporating energy efficient measures that go beyond code in new construction. But that's something that I don't think has quite been figured out yet, except for the part that we're talking about facilities owned and operated by the nonprofit itself. I think that would largely not include rented or leased properties or spaces. And then also the specific measures we're talking about. We're talking about hard measures. We're talking about heating, cooling, air conditioning equipment, and then other things like roofs, insulation, sort of the real basics of energy efficiency. Probably not a lot of creativity in what counts as energy efficiency there.
Okay, thank you. The final question in the chat was, will the grant require going through sam.gov?
You may need a SAM account. That's possible. I don't know. That would be something that would be part of the application package. I'm trying to remember what sam.gov stands for. It's basically it's a way to validate who the applicant is. It wouldn't surprise me if that's a requirement. I think it's a relatively low burden requirement, and it wouldn't surprise me if organizations that have received or benefited from federal funds in the past have a SAM account or a SAM number. Whether or not they remember it is maybe a different story. It's probably in the same folder with your tax exempt ID or something like that. But it's probably too early to know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Great. I think that answers all of the questions, unless anybody else has additional questions. So I'll pass it back to Natalia to wrap us up.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you to everybody who has done a lot of work to put this together. I kind of want to close out by saying, we recognize as ReImagine Appalachia, and I'm sure our nonprofit friends here, we recognize that this may be like drinking from a fire hose, but as someone said, isn't the water sweet? So I think a lot of this could be overwhelming, but I think it's also important that we, enter the process as you feel comfortable. If you all have the capacity to submit public comment, if you all have some staff that think about these things, please do. Please feel free. If you're from a small faith community and if you can, please do. At the same time, there are a lot of unknowns. And again, we are having a series of events in we'll say late winter, early spring, around the deep dives. Hopefully we'll have some more answers. And I'll just go back to what I said earlier. This is really to help everybody think about how this is going to work. Again, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's solar panels, whether it's weatherization, whether it's inside the walls of our houses of worship or outside the walls. Jeffrey's remarks really laid that out beautifully. But we're in this together, is what I'll say. You can lean on us. I'll send an email out with all these links in the chat. We have 1 minute left. Oh yeah. Do you want to just mention that last comment, Kim?
EEN is hosting an event similar to this one, but a little more focused on churches on December 14th, and you can find it at creationcare.org/events. And also, I just wanted to add that submitting public comment is a very effective way of getting your voice heard and influencing how things go. So, if you have time to figure out how to do that, that can be very effective.
Yeah, and I just clicked through. I think if you have an hour or less, you could probably write something up and submit it. Let's get our voices heard throughout Appalachia. So, all right. Thank you so much. Really great to see you all, and we'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye.